안녕하세요.
Hello. I'm Dr. G. Daekyung from Seoul May Orthodontic Clinic. How is your clear aligner practice going these days? Today marks our 7th session of the Clear Aligner Master course. Today, I'd like to talk about what you need to check before pressing the approve button. Once we send out the patient's records, we receive various treatment plans and viewers in return. At that point, it's time for us to hit the approve button. Before we do that, there are a few key things we need to check carefully. Key factors include the final occlusion, the amount of IPR, the total number of aligners, the progression of tooth movement, and overcorrections. Let's take a closer look at each of these. Once the setup is completed, you'll receive a notification message on your phone. Once you select a patient case, you'll get a setup design approval request like this. You'll also see the setup design notes, IPR and attachment details, tooth movement information, and the viewer. After reviewing the viewer, you'll evaluate whether the planned tooth movement is reasonable and whether it will work clinically. Once you've confirmed that, you can submit modification requests. This could include comments such as, "This movement seems more appropriate," or "This area may be clinically problematic." Once you've written out your modification requests, you can click the Approve button. Let's go over a few key things to check before you do that. Now, let's start by reviewing final occlusion. As mentioned earlier, we're going to focus on a few things today. First, let's go over the occlusal surface, alignment and arch symmetry, and the degree of expansion. Then from the frontal view, we'll check midline, angulation, and overbite. And from the lateral view, we'll examine the canine and molar relationship. Next, we examine the overjet, marginal ridge level, and any occlusal discrepancies. What standards are we using? Most of you learned these things during dental schools, concepts like Andrew's 6 keys to normal occlusion, various occlusal concepts, and ABO objective grading system and other occlusal scoring system. With those standards in mind, we need to apply them carefully when evaluating occlusion. Now, the next point is actually quite important. When the setup protocol or viewer is generated, you might see the total number of aligners. This can be a quite sensitive issue, especially when considering treatment cost and time. In many cases, the fewer the aligners, the better. Generally, for a Class 1 crowding cases, you can expect around 30 to 40 aligners, often 33, 34, maybe 38. In half-cust Class 2 cases or orthodontic treatment involving extraction, it's common to see the total number of steps exceed 70. Let's take a look at another example. I am not saying you need to treat this kind of case. It's just to show you an example of difficult case. It is Class 2 with deep bite and scissor bite. This one is a real challenge. Let's take a look at the video. We'll go through the frontal, lateral, and occlusal views. As you can see, the treatment plan includes 78 aligners. Let's look at one more case. This one is quite similar. It's also Class 2 with overbite and scissor bite. It's a total of 86 aligners. Before any modification was made, the protocol showed a total of 86 aligners. Let's review the viewer for this case. As you can see, molar distalization is taking place in the posterior region. During this period, whether it's 40, 42, or 43 steps, there is no movement at all in the anterior region. That might be acceptable if it's designed to facilitate desirable tooth movement later on. Even though the patient keeps wearing aligners on the molars for 8 to 10 months, there is no visible movement in the front teeth. Naturally, patients will start feeling discouraged and their compliance is likely to drop. Now, let's try making some modifications. What really matters in the modification process is ensuring that the planned tooth movements are reasonable, both in terms of individual movements and possible side effects. By taking these movements into account, we can sequence the tooth movements more efficiently and reduce unnecessary steps. As you can see here, molar distalization improves the overjet and overbite in the anterior region, along with some improvements in crowding. Tooth movements for vertical correction of the occlusion in the anterior region were performed earlier in the sequence, and space was secured through IPR. Alignment and leveling are also being carried out in the anterior region. At the initial stage, is it possible to complete this case with just 55 aligners? While refinement may be needed, the overall steps and aligners can be reduced with proper planning. The third point is the feasibility of the planned tooth movements. There are several key aspects we need to understand and be aware of in this regard. Within the physical limitations of clear aligners, we need to consider how different tooth movements interact with each other. We'll take a closer look at these things. Before that, let me give you a quick quiz. Here's the first question. Are these two movements shown in the image synergistic or antagonistic? In the image, you can see molar distalization and proclination in the anterior region. Think about it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Now let's move on to the second question. Here's the second one. Is this movement combination synergistic or antagonistic? This time, we are looking at posterior expansion combined with protrusion in the anterior region. Think about it one more time. 1, 2, 3. As I've been studying to better deliver useful knowledge and insights to all of you, I came across a few papers that I found quite helpful. I believe these papers will be of great help. They cover various movement combinations that tend to be more synergetic as well as those that often create interference or side effects when combined. Reviewing these papers will greatly help you evaluate tooth movements more effectively and establish better treatment plans. It'll be helpful for you to take a look. Next, let's look at the feasibility of the planned tooth movements. As you can see, the teeth are moving one by one, step by step. This isn't a quiz, but take a moment to think. Is this tooth movement feasible? 1, 2, 3. From my perspective, it looks possible. It may be feasible, but it's extremely challenging in reality. When a treatment plan is proposed, can we expect the teeth to move as planned just by wearing aligners? Absolutely not. If one or two teeth start moving, then the third and fourth follow. Will the rest of the teeth just stay in place and neatly follow one by one? Of course not. The teeth that have already moved and the ones that are supposed to move next can act as anchors, pulling back the teeth that had started moving. These kind of things can happen. Can we manage it? Yes, we can. For example, we can use screws to apply additional forces and move the posterior teeth backward. So the key question is, how can we efficiently incorporate anchorage strategies into our treatment plan? Let's look at another case. Here, I was trying to relieve crowding, but we first need to create space due to narrow arch. What do you think? Technically, it works. As you can see, it's as if we're using an RPE or some kind of expansion appliance. The anterior teeth are spreading out, and you can see diastema forming. That could happen, but in this case, it looks like unnecessary tooth movement. Now let's see what's been changed. By creating space through IPR and a certain amount of expansion, we can achieve alignment and leveling. In the previous case, there are still some areas that could be refined. But compared to the first one, a diastema was artificially created between the two anterior teeth, and then we tried a round tip movement to close the space later. This kind of movement places unnecessary stress on the teeth and surrounding periodontal tissues. In that sense, it can be considered unnecessary tooth movement. When you review the tooth movements in digital setup protocol, it's important to observe everything carefully, like a hawk. Make sure to evaluate whether the movements were reasonable and communicate with the designers when in doubt. Only after that should you click the Approve button. Let's move on to the next topic, overcorrection. In many studies, the overcorrection is commonly discussed. According to the literature, the overall accuracy of clear aligner treatments is reported to be around 50%. That's why many papers suggest that about 20% overcorrection should be added during clear aligner treatment. Depending on the type of tooth movement and case complexity, some degree of overcorrection may be required. If you recall the first case, it was actually simple and minor one. We initially planned for about 6 stages of movement. But as you can see, the actual outcome differs from the planned one. Even though this was a simple case, it still required overcorrection. So we requested overcorrection and proceeded with the updated plan. But here's what's important. Before requesting overcorrection, you need to carefully evaluate whether the tooth movement failed to occur despite the effort to move it or whether overcorrection is truly necessary. As mentioned in previous session, unnecessary intrusive forces can be generated during movements such as rotation and crowding. That's why, before deciding on overcorrection for cases involving rotation or crowding, it's crucial to check if there is insufficient space or if a slight amount of additional IPR is needed. Another important aspect of overcorrection, often referred to as overengineering, is related to deep bite and crowding. Here, we'll focus on deep bite. Especially when dealing with Class 1 crowding, which I'll explain in more detail later, we often design a reverse curve to help flatten a deep curve of SPI. However, it can sometimes be difficult to achieve the desired flattening of the curve of SPI during the leveling process. This is also true for conventional bracket systems. That's why we implement overcorrection, or what's sometimes called overengineering. As part of this approach, the premolars may be designed to have occlusal high spots to create excessive contact, while the anterior teeth are set to have a slightly open bite. So before clicking the Approve button, you should describe your requests if these kinds of issues arise. For Magic Align systems, you can write heavy contact for the posterior region and light contact for the anterior region, even in Korean. You can request 0 mm or 0.2 mm overbite in the anterior region. This allows you to design a shallower vertical overbite. In the earlier case we saw, you could request that the final occlusion stage be designed with approximately 0 mm of overbite. You should submit these additional treatment requests as needed. It's important to compare the setup before and after to make sure that your instructions have been properly reflected in the design. And now, finally, we've come to the last part of today's session. This isn't something we'll cover in detail right now. But even if you designed the setup with overcorrection, side effects may still appear during the treatment. One example is the development of a deep bite. So you continue observing the patient while they're wearing the aligners, and what happens? You might think overbite has become too shallow. It can happen. So, when deep bite improvement is planned during the staging, it's important to closely monitor the occlusal changes throughout the period. I recommend more frequent observation, such as every 3 aligners or every 4 weeks. That's my final comment for this session. After reviewing all the points I mentioned today, and once you've thoroughly checked them, you can click the Approve button you see here. That way, you'll be able to access a well-designed setup protocol, web viewer, and simulated tooth movement based on your approval. I hope you found today's session helpful. I look forward to seeing you again with more useful content next time. Thank you.